Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. I'm James David, and in today's video, I would like to showcase my overall garden which I have been cultivating for over 18 years. Here, I would like to celebrate my 100th video compilation over these last 2 years in my garden journey in this YouTube channel. So I would really like to thank you so much for all your support and encouragement. So sit back and I hope you enjoy the show. Just a brief introduction, my garden is very much designed as a tropical garden theme where it is very much focused as a foliage shaded dwelling plants. I have managed to get a nice collection that is able to grow and thrive well in my garden condition, which was very much on an experimental of a trial and error, figuring out what can actually grow best in my garden condition. Another factor to note, as my garden is very small, hence I have to maximize my garden space, and thus I have to really figure out what grows best in my tight compact garden space. Here, most of the plants are hardy plants grown as a vertical wall garden plants. These are very much geared, in fact, keeping them as scarlet leafy plants, as growing flowering plants are very challenging in my garden condition. I also realized that growing plants such as these in compact position somehow creates a kind of an atmosphere climate zone where all of these plants seems to do well and thrive in this condition. Due to this factor, the humidity seems to be very stable and the plant seems to love it, and they are actually doing so well in this kind of setup. I must say that I have faced a lot of challenges due to the hot and dry season followed by the rainy season where everything is wet and easily exposed to overwatering that can cause root rot problem and fungal problems. Eventually what I found that the right balance of getting the right plants, thirsty plants together with plants that can actually go together as companion plants actually made this whole garden a successful factor. Eventually I've learned knowing what works best, growing the right plant in the right condition, especially placing them exactly where they love to grow in my garden space. I must say it was actually very much of a journey growing certain plants, and also the very much on the trial factor where most plants which did not do well, I have decided to let them go, especially when it comes to terms of growing rhizome begonias. If you notice that I've actually switched more towards the cane begonias, which I find that they seems to be more hardy and does more better in comparison to rhizome begonias. Also, another factor that I've noticed that way back then I actually have grown a lot of other leafy plants such as Begonias and sensitive plants, and I find that they are quite very finicky and difficult to take care, and I find that by trial and error again in discovery, I find that Anthuriums seems to be very much fall into a hardy category, and they seems to love my garden condition very much. In this case where I have slowly cultivating them and started to have a collection, and they seems to do very well in my garden condition at this current moment. I have been keeping this unique tropical plant for years. It does not have a common name, and the botanic name is so difficult to pronounce. I'll try my best. Schismatoglottus. I can't remember how many times I've done a retake on this. Forgive me. I will just put the name on the list above. You can just figure it out, and it's been doing very well in my garden for many years, and I find that it is a very good plant, and I'm actually seeking out few variation of this particular type, and I managed to collect 3 for this moment of time. As I mentioned earlier, if you can see, most of these particular plants are actually very much companion plants, and in grown in a compact position. Over here, I have actually also cultivated plants that is actually more on hanging pots, and here in this collection is those of the tropical kind where they fall into the cascading hanging plants. Mostly here in this collection are actually ferns, Hoya, Epiphyrenum. This is actually Queen of the Night, but it's of a different particular species. So most of the types that I'm actually looking at is the succulent type, but very much fall into these tropical hardy plants. I used to have a lot of orchids then, but somehow I find that orchids seems to be very finicky and extremely sensitive. Hence, most of them actually have died. It was due to a wrong fertilizer that I've used, and I've also realized that handling them seems to be very difficult in my garden condition because of they do tend to face root rot and stem rot, and hence I just keep those which are actually hardy. You can see this is the vining kind of vanilla orchid, which I believe it will not actually flower or bloom, but I would like the foliage and also the vining factor, so I'm just keeping them as trailing plants. Here is actually a fishbone cactus which actually coil, and also deciduous seems to do very well in this condition. So in most and less this is what I have actually managed to grow. Also you can see a little bit of Hoya Kiri here, which is a variegated version. So some of the Hoyas and deciduous seems to fall very nicely in this kind of a setup. Another tropical succulent plant which is also having a cascading effect is actually Ripsalis, and I find that there are also quite a range of them. Not all of the Ripsalis seems to do well, but those that actually can handle my garden condition are actually doing fine. I noticed the key factor here is actually watering and media. The soil media I'm actually using is very much coconut chips with sand, because I find that a normal potting media seems to cause root rot problems and such as this. So a right balance is actually a very much key factor in keeping these plants thriving in my garden setup. I also find that air plant seems to do well in this my garden condition, and I also added slowly and introduced some of the types, the common ones, which is quite hardy and they seems to do fine, and also some of these types of succulents. I can't really recall their name. If I'm not wrong, is actually a hernia species, and also placed this Monstera deliciosa here, and I'm just actually more on a trial factor here. I just want to see how it actually fare in this kind of garden condition. So in a way, a lot of these tropical plants, when they are actually grown together, they seems to do well. This is Photo Brazil, and a little bit of this Anthurium, which is actually growing here. Also again more on a trial factor. I just want to see how they are faring it. There's actually a little bit of this stem cut which actually propagating here because due to space constraint. So in a way, what I want to mention to you here is that you can actually bend the rules and try and see what actually can work best, and if it grows well, why not? So there is no hard and fast rule that you must follow a setup of rules, and if they are actually doing well in certain garden condition, and if what I mentioned here is that growing in a compact position, and if it works best for you, then go ahead. There is no rules underlying saying that you should or should not do this. So in a way, being creative and able to see what actually thrive in the garden condition, and if it works for you, by all means be happy and rejoice over it. However, I must say that this setup do tend to look very unruly and a little bit more messy, and everything seems to be a bit uptight. However, what I want to mention here is that it's very much more on a temporary setup, and when I actually have the time, I will actually propagate them properly and keep them as pests, because knowing plants such as this, they are actually very sensitive and not easy to come by, and they can actually die easily. I must mention to you that I have tried growing this particular Piper coquetum, and it took me so much of a time that they don't seem to grow very well in anywhere else, and they just only can grow in this condition. So it is a little bit of challenging, because at certain times they just want to grow where they want to grow, and in any other conditions they don't seem to do well. So in a way it is very much a mystery to me, because it's not the lighting or the media or anything of that kind, but it's actually the garden space where they can actually thrive. As I mentioned earlier, I have actually replaced most of the Rex begonias that it was actually growing here. Most of them actually died, and slowly I have introducing Anthuriums here, which they are actually doing very fine. These are the older versions of my Cattleya, which have been surviving with me for years, and they have not died, but they are not really thriving either. So it's a little bit of balance of these two, both sides. And I also find that this particular area here which I've grown, these are some of the setups of all that is actually doing well in this garden space. Very much earlier, where the Dieffenbachias are, actually nothing seems to actually grow in that spot. Most of them end up rotting and dying away, and I found that Dieffenbachia seems to do very well in this very how do you say, tight and wet space area, and I find that they're thriving. So this is the side of my garden, where you can actually see the vertical wall together with the hanging plants, and at the bottom here is a collection of all the Anthurium plants. So I have to say that I have to be very selective in what I actually want to grow. So I have skipped most of the plants which I really liked, and just focus on the ones that actually thrive very well in my garden space. So this is one of the factors that I've noticed, that once a particular plant does well, I tend to just focus on that particular species and expand my collection on that particular plant. I also noticed, though these are actually shade-loving plants, they seems to need some element of sunlight on it. What I've noticed is not too hot blazing sun, but also not fully shaded. Like this particular ferns, it may appear to be a type of maidenhair fern, but of all the collection, only this particular one that has survived. Also, together with the collection of air plants, I find that they actually need sunlight to thrive, lacking which half of them actually died in my hands. This is very much an experimental factor of I'm trying to grow a terrarium using Hoya, and I think it's a bad idea because everything seems to be coming out of it. So as I mentioned earlier to you, a lot of it in my garden is very much experimental and a trial and error basis. However, in an overall factor, I noticed that when a plant does well, they seems to last very long, and I don't have much problem with it. So in a way, the other factor that I actually look into is that when it comes to sensitive plants, I try to propagate them as many as possible, just to keep them, just in case if they were to die, especially when it comes to begonias. Another factor that I have to keep an eye very much is pruning, because they can be very lanky and can be very overcrowded. Now, this is a miniature pineapple which recently I have introduced. I'm just looking into it and see how they're actually faring, and so far they're doing very fine. I also noticed that this is a collection of all my Bromeliads which I actually kept aside here. They are sun lovers. Without it, they can actually die and rot away. Inclusive of, this is what I mentioned about the air plants, are also sun lovers, because without the sun they seems to fall apart and rot away. These are some of my collection of my begonias, Begonia maculata, and a few other cane begonias here. If I'm not wrong, this is actually burning bush. So I find that the other factor about this particular types of begonia is that they can grow very tall and can be very lanky, so they may require to be trimmed down and repropagated, and leaving them as such can be cause them to become top heavy, and in most cases can rot away. So these are the challenges that I face when it comes to begonia. But somehow I find that apart from this particular sensitive plants, when it comes to philodendron and zigzag plant, some of these are very hardy, and I can just get away with anything with them, because growing them, especially these particular types, seems to be very hardy. I must say, when it comes to Agloanemas, these are actually my favorites. They have never died on my hands. Actually, I've been keeping them for so many years, and I find that this is one of the best plants to keep when it comes for colored plants, because they are very hardy and they are non-fussy plants. To say that this is actually Alocasia lucky one. When I got it, was a very small plant, and it was actually riddled with spider mites, but placing them here, and I never had a problem. So in a way, as I mentioned earlier, placing them in the right place, in the right condition, they seems to thrive, and not much care is actually required. This is a different type of zigzag plant. So over here is a little bit challenging for me, because nothing seems to grow very well, but so far I managed to keep some of the cattleyas here, and they seems to do well. I must say that I've actually had a lot of collection on Aphasias, known as flame violets, which a lot of them actually died due to a pest problem, and I was not able to find a right pest material to actually handle them, and the whole collection actually died. Now I'm actually just slowly introducing and handling them, and so far they are fine. So this is the other side of my vertical garden wall, and I find a little bit of ferns and bromeliads, and this is what I mentioned earlier, the Dieffenbachia species, which is doing so well in this plant condition. I used to have a Hupirisia species collection, easily about 5 to 10 of types, so most of them actually died and gone because due to wrong fertilizer, and because the collection was quite rare, and I've lost all of them, so I'm not actually starting back them. So as I mentioned, just focusing on hardy plants, because it's not so much of they don't cost a lot in comparison to sensitive plants. These are some of the orchids that I've managed to keep over the years. These are the ones that actually have not died in my hands. This is actually very much a sun-loving plant. It seems to be a very much of a hardy type. So some orchids which actually survive in my hands, I just keeping it and just handling it, as this seems to be hardy in my garden condition. As I mentioned earlier about Apicius, the flame violets, and over here is the other side of my hanging garden plant, where the cascading plants here. If you can look here, a big size of this fishtail cactus, and some of these particular types of bromeliads and succulents. So this is my style of gardening, where keeping them and growing them in compact gardening seems to work best in my garden condition. When it comes to fertilizer, what I actually use here is a very light fertilizing, 2 weeks once, and I just use foliar fertilizer and I spray on them, and just enough to keep them not to overgrow, and just so they have enough nutrients to grow. This is very much my general garden view. I will actually come back on each of the plant factors, and I talk more in detail. It's just here to show to you what is actually an overall garden that I have, so that you can actually see what I actually grow. So thank you so much for visiting. I really I hope you enjoyed the show that I've actually shown here, and if you have any questions, do put them in a comment below, and I try my best to answer it. And I hope that you enjoy gardening as much as I enjoy gardening and sharing my knowledge and my experiences with you. And I hope that I have another long journey with you in my gardening experience. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.